Okay, so this video is all about large repositories and learning how to navigate them. All right, so do you ever wonder how professional software engineers can navigate large code bases? But first, I need to give you some context. So I'm using React server components with D3.js, and the goal is to render an x-axis without relying on the D3 selection package because reasons. That's going to be a whole nother video. But the short answer is D3 accesses the DOM directly, while React uses the virtual DOM. Okay, so here's the approach. So navigating large code bases is all about having a singular goal and understanding that goal. So understanding the goal at the micro level, this helps you to quickly pinpoint the code. But you can't forget about the bigger picture, because it's so easy to get lost in the details, right? So it's all about this zooming in and zooming out. So it's being able to look at a function without reading all the code, but recognize it's sorting something. And once you learn how to do this, you can move quickly. Eventually, you'll develop and realize how crucial this skill set is. All right, so let me show you the way. God damn it. Okay, so here it is. So I want to render an x-axis without using D3's axis bottom. All right, so the very first thing I would do is go to the documentation. Okay, so before we look at the D3 documentation, I'm gonna bring up the project where I've been exploring this. And so for the backend, I'm using Node.js, TypeScript. I'm using EJS for the templating language. I'm using Postgres for the backend. And then I'm using HTMX because I wanted to play around with it. And I'm also using Daisy UI, which is built on top of Tailwind CSS. So anyways, let me go ahead and start the server. Go ahead and bring that up. Just close that. So that should be up now. Okay. So now just go ahead and select a season, and you see we have data, but we have no line for our x-axis. And this is what we're going to explore right now. We're going to figure out how to render that x-axis line without using or without installing this package D3 axis. And so I started using D3.js before I learned like React or any of these frameworks. And so I've had some experience with vanilla D3. And so by looking at this example, I know what it's doing, right? So we created an SVG, then we're accessing that SVG, appending the group element, and then to that group element, we're appending this attribute transform, and then we're using axis bottom, and we're passing in this variable here, which represents an X scale. So at this point, this doesn't really tell me that much, but D3's documentation is phenomenal. It's so good. Okay, so the next thing I would do is look for an example that might show me what axis bottom is doing behind the scenes. And so since I have experience with D3.js and I've learned about SVG elements when needed, I know that I'm looking for a path element, right? I'm looking for this element, but the important thing is this thing right here. Okay, so let's just pretend, I know I'm looking for a path, but I don't really know what this D attribute is. And so this is what I like about D3.js is because you can just look it up, right? Path D SVG. As you can see, I looked it up in the past. And at this point, I'm not going to sit here and read through the entire documentation. That's for some other time. Right now, I need to stay focused, right? I can't get lost in all the details. So, okay, right, I'll scroll down. Okay, here we go. I see path there. I see more. Eventually, you get to path commands. And so here, right, path commands are instructions. And so here they are. M is move to, line to, and then all these other ones, right? And so now I kind of have an idea of what this D attribute is doing. It's just drawing a path. And these are the commands that you use to specify how to draw a path. Okay, so now at this point, I would go back to the documentation. And again, I know I'm looking for a path element. And we want to figure out how D3 is manipulating this path behind the scenes and generating this this path here, this string. Okay, so the next thing to do would go to the GitHub repository, and then I'll go into source. And luckily, this code base is pretty self-contained. But if we look here, there's a lot of information to parse, and there seems to be, right, like 175 lines of code. So it's not a lot of code, but if you take a look, there's a lot going on. Okay, and so the first thing I would do is search for, right, axis bottom. Okay. If we look down here, we see axis bottom, and it seems to be, yeah, it's taken in the scale, and then it's returning a function axis. Okay, so the next thing for me would be to look for this axis function, right? Let's see. It's probably going to be at the beginning. Okay, so I know it's at the beginning, right? It's right here. Okay, so once we find the axis function, I'll go ahead and select this parameter just to get an idea of what it's doing. Right, and here we see that if it's either top or left, it's going to be -1, and then otherwise it's going to be 1. Then if we actually scroll up a little bit, you can see here that the developers, they decided to globally define these, which again, you can see here that if I start to fixate on these lines right here, you know, it's easy to get sidetracked and it's really easy to get lost in all these details. So the important thing here is that this parameter here, this argument that is being passed in, is determining whether we want the axis on top, the bottom, the right, or the left side. Okay, now if we look at the scale parameter, just to get an idea of what's going on, there's actually a lot going on, and at this point, I don't want to get sidetracked. I think it's a common mistake and something I did when I was first starting out to get sidetracked in all these details. If I go back to the D3 axis documentation and remind myself of the goal, I want to know how this D attribute is being, you know, generated behind the scenes. So at this point, this would be me zooming out so I don't get lost in all the details. So then, okay, let's go back to the code base and let's actually look for that path. See if we can find a variable named path. Okay, so what I can do then now is just search for path. Okay, so if I search for path, I actually want that first one, but you'll see we have a couple of hits, and here it looks like we're doing, okay, selection, select all. Okay, but where's this selection coming from? Looks like it's defined up here. Okay, and then if we look at this line of code, we see, okay, we have context, selection. Okay, where's context coming in from? Okay, it's being passed in. And so here again, I think this is a common thing to do. It's pretty easy to get sidetracked. But let's just say we followed this rabbit hole, right? I'll show you how easy it is to get sidetracked. Right, so I know this is actually from the package D3 selection, so I'll go ahead and look it up. Let's just go ahead and, you know, follow that path. So now if I go over to D3 selection, right, I can go to the source, and you can see that there are more files. So where do we start? So maybe we can look at index, right? Okay, not that useful, just exporting all the necessary functions. Okay, and so maybe at this point, maybe I'm a little lost. I don't know where to go, but it just so happens that this keyword selection, right, is the name of this directory. So, you know, I'll just go ahead and click into it and then look around, right? We see, okay, we see again, select all. Okay, so now if we go to, where is index? Okay, so now if we open up the index file, we can see It's not readily apparent, but D3 was created in 2011. So this is before ES6 classes. So to me here, it looks like they're constructing a class, right? So this is kind of like our constructor. And then this right here is what allows us to chain off the methods. So let's see if I go back to the example, right? So it allows us to do this. So like dot transition, dot duration, dot call. And then, right, so it's importing all the other helper methods and appending it to the prototype, right, of this function. So this is the file that is bringing everything together. But again, this is not useful for me, at least not yet. And as you can see, it's really easy to just get lost in all these details. So now I'll head back to the D3 Axis repository. And all I need to know is that this line of code is creating a path. Okay, so now I need to move on, right? Looks like here we're reassigning and we're doing something path, merge. So I don't remember exactly what all this is doing, but at a high level, it's creating that path SVG and it's appending two attributes, class and stroke. And if we go back to the D3 documentation, we can see that, right? Stroke and class. And even though I feel like I'm getting closer to my goal, I still don't know how that D attribute is created. Okay, so I'll highlight that keyword again, and as you can see, okay, here's path again, path, okay, some sort of transition. Okay, I can ignore that, so let's keep moving. Right, so we keep moving, we scroll down, and we see path, again, this reference. If we look closely, we see this. So it's selecting that path element and appending that attribute D. And so finally, this is how D3 generates that D attribute for a path, which will draw the line for the x-axis or your y-axis. Right, so just by looking at this condition, if we want to orient left or right, we go here. So in my case, I want to orient the x-axis at the bottom. So it's going to be this, right? So now I got to figure out, it looks like there's another nested ternary in here, right? So if it's tick size outer, we're going to do this. Otherwise, do this. So at this point, I don't know what tick size outer is. So I'll go up and I see it looks like it's defaulted to 6. Right, so let me scroll back down. I'll go back to the D3 documentation and I'll look for tick size outer, and sure enough, here it is, right? And so now you can read about what tick size outer does. Okay, so moving along. So I know tick size outer is defaulted to 6. So here's the string. This is how it generates that string that will display the axis, the x-axis at the bottom. And so now, let's just say I don't know what this M is, or this V is, or this H. What I can do, as I did earlier, right, is just search for the path SVG and read a little bit more about this D attribute and how it works. Okay, so at this point, now I know sort of how the D attribute is calculated behind the scenes. And so what I'll do is I'll just resize this window. Let me get rid of that. I'll go ahead and resize this window as well. And I'll go ahead and bring up that controller. Right, so I already figured it out, but let's go ahead and just get rid of it. Okay, and so once I found this logic that's calculating the D attribute behind the scenes, what I did is I just, crap. what I did is I just took this entire line here. I just copied and pasted it, and I went ahead and just created these variables, right? Range, what else? There's k, tick, size, outer. There's offset. I'll put range, 1 up here, k, tick, size, outer. What's going on? Right, so it looks like range, k, tick size outer, offset, range 1, and then k and tick size outer. Okay, so this looks good. And so now we need to start filling in this information, right? Okay, so what is range 0? Right, so if I go up, it looks like range, right? Okay, so I know that when you create a D3 scale, you need to specify the domain and the range. And in the range, it's typically 2 values from what I've seen. And so what we're doing here is we're grabbing that start point where we want to start drawing the x-axis, and then range 1 is the end point. Draw from here to here. And so this is just doing some, so the number that's actually in this array is a number represented as a string. And here we're just coercing that string to a number. And so range 0 is the first value in our range, and range 1 is the second value in our range. Okay, so at this point, I don't really know what the offset is. So I'll go ahead and look that up, and I see, okay, window, whatever, undefined. Okay, so I don't really know too much about this device pixel ratio. So what I could do is just look it up, right? MDN, and then just read about it quickly so I can familiarize myself. And so at this point, again, I don't want to get sidetracked. So I'll go back to the code base. And in this case, I'm just going to take the value and set it to 0. So I'll go over here and set k to 0, right? Okay, so if I go back down, so I know what range 0 is, so I'll go ahead and do that. So it's going to be something, right? So we're going to have to pass in some scale, then invoke that range function, and then take that first value. And same with this, right? We're going to have to do scale, invoke the range function, get that first value, and then we're going to apply an offset. In this case, it's 0, but it doesn't matter. I'm adding it because eventually I'm going to, play with this and figure out exactly how it works. And so we've seen tick size outer, so I know it's defaulted to 6, right? Oh, offset should be 0, and then k. Okay, we'll figure out k right now. So I got most of the information that I need. Okay, so now I have to figure out what this k is, right? So if I go to k, okay, so it looks like if we want to orient top or left, it's going to be -1, otherwise it's 1. So we take 1 in our case. Okay, so we're almost done, but at this point, now we need to construct this string. Shit. Still getting used to NeoVim. Okay, so now I just have to pass this this function into our template. which is get D. And let me actually go ahead and bring up that template. It looks something like this. And as you can see here, this is all that's left to do. You just need to supply a path element. And then for the D attribute, we're just passing in that scale, right? The X scale, we're passing it to get D, and then get D is figuring out how to generate that string. And so if I didn't fuck anything up, we should see an X-axis. All right, so let's see. Okay, looks like we got an X-axis. So now I gotta fix the thickness, and for that I know, man, it's so hard to concentrate when I'm thinking about the code and also like talking into the camera. But anyways, back to the controllers, and right, so I know that this tick size outer variable will affect the thickness of that line. And I'll go ahead and fetch another chart, and there you go. So now it's starting to look a lot better, right? Anyway, so I just wanted to illustrate this point of zooming out and zooming in, and having a goal, a clear goal, understanding that goal. And I also wanted to showcase how easy it is to get sidetracked. And it's very easy to get overwhelmed as you're tracing code. It's really easy to go down rabbit holes. Anyways, hopefully you found this video useful, and I wish somebody would have made a video like this. I would have saved so much time. I feel like maybe I would have been farther ahead. And hopefully this helps you avoid those common pitfalls when you're navigating large code bases. I know this package wasn't the biggest code base, but that's the reality of navigating large code bases. It's, you're just thrown into the deep end, and a lot of the times you're not familiar with the code, and this is how you do it. At my first role, when I first started, the first few months, it definitely took some time getting used to, but once I figured this out, it allowed me to move that much quicker. But eventually, it got to the point where I was assigned backend tickets, and now I function in a full stack capacity. So a lot of the times when I'm in these backends, I'm not very familiar with the code, but this has helped me so much. So I can quickly figure out where the code is. And then once I pinpoint that location, then I can start working on figuring out a solution. And when you get there, you hope that there's good documentation, right? As I showcase, D3JS has amazing documentation. And a lot of the times when you're navigating shitty code bases, you find a lot of one-word variables. They're cryptic. It's hard to figure out what the hell is going on. The documentation is lacking. It's disorganized. It's annoying. If you found this video useful, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.